I think as soon as we can get the rest of the crowd settled down that's out there in the back, hey, you folks in the back, come on up and sit if you don't mind. We're going to go ahead and start. Our special guests that are coming in from Club Lake aren't here yet, but they're going to be here, hopefully. We're going to start the program this evening by doing the book auction first. And Margaret has been kind enough to bring many of her books, or bring her book that she's published that she's going to talk about tonight. And she's brought an extra copy, and we're going to do the raffle now, and whoever wins that book after the program, Margaret will be happy to autograph it to you and put the date on there. And so without further ado, I want to also introduce to you those who haven't been here before, to Susan Lanning, who's the executive director of the Audie Murphy American Cotton Museum. Susan has all the tickets that were handed out to you all, and so I'm going to reach in and grab a ticket, and comes from a Folger coffee can, so you know how official all of that is. Now, the first two numbers is 1-5. Everybody in? All right. 3-5. Everybody still in? Paul, you still in? All right. Next number is 1. Last number is 1. Oh, there you go. And he's what?
He's a great nephew. What is question all to you, Barry?
So, well, now somebody's going to say we rigged this one. So here's what we're going to do. Here's what we're going to do. I just thought of this. There isn't an official memoir of Audie Murphy, yet the book To Hell and Back gets as close to it is available. We have that book in the bookstore, and we're going to have a drawing for it and give somebody else. And if you win it again, Barry, no, you can't win it again because I got the ticket. All right, let's see who else. And I'm not going to go through the rigmarole this time. The last two numbers is 17. 17. 17. Now, surely somebody's not in the restroom.
Was it June?
Anybody got 17?
June?
June? All right, June, we will get you that book. And now we can't have Audie autograph it, but anyway. All right. Susan, you'll take care of that with her, won't you? Okay. Now, for those of you who have been here before, you're going to listen to me talk for just a few minutes before we introduce Miss Kincannon. So you're going to have to go through this scenario that I've done several times. So welcome, you first-timers, to the Audie Murphy American Cotton Museum. And the fourth lecture of a 5-lecture series of the World War II History Roundtable Audie Murphy chapter. For first-time attendees, my name is Ron Robinson, and I have the privilege of serving as chairman of the Roundtable Board. The Roundtable was founded in an effort to memorialize the efforts and sacrifices of those men and women of our nation who served in World War II and successfully defeated the forces of tyranny. Our motto, printed in your program, says it all. They fought to save our nation's freedom. The glory is theirs. The duty to tell their story is ours. 2025 is the 80th anniversary of the end of the war. How appropriate the overall theme for our lectures in 2025 is 1945, Peace at Last, the events that made it happen. I am sure that Ms. Kincannon will have her own views of the event or events that hastened the end of the war in May and September of 1945. And 2025 is the 100th anniversary of Audie Murphy's birth. To Hell and Back, the book that covers most of Audie's military and movie career, is available for purchase in the bookstore. Our gold sponsor for tonight's program is Dr. Rocky Clinton, Professor Emeritus at East Texas A&M University, and Alliance Bank of Greenville. Both have been supporters of the Roundtable from the beginning. With us tonight is Paul Painter, Market President for Hunt County. Paul, will you stand to be recognized and let everybody know who you are? Paul Painter. And Paul is also a member of Kiwanis and has been around Kiwanis for many, many years. So he also serves the community in that respect also. Rocky is under the weather and could not be with us tonight. A special thank you also to Juice. For those of you who don't know, Greenville Electric Utility System, abbreviated, is JUICE. Isn't that appropriate? For video, we want to thank them for videotaping and uploading all Roundtable lectures for YouTube, for your viewing up on YouTube, which then can be seen worldwide. All of our lectures of the Roundtable series are up there permanently for you to look at. Gold sponsors support the direct costs of bringing our lectures to Greenville. If your company or organization has an interest in becoming a gold sponsor for 2026, see me after tonight's program. Our special thanks to the Audie Murphy American Cotton Museum for hosting our lectures. Staff members Kristen Still and Susan Lanning have been invaluable with their support. Other Roundtable volunteers this evening include John Zanaga, John Bird, and Logan Panos, whom you see have greeted you at the back of the room. At the conclusion of tonight's lecture, the screen behind me will be lifted and attendees are welcome to tour. First-time attendees are welcome to a tour of the Audie Murphy portion of the museum. Following Margaret's lecture, she will be happy to answer any of your questions. Skip Steele, the program's chair of the Roundtable, will conduct the Q&A with her. A microphone will be brought to you. Please wait until Susan Lanning brings it to you before asking your question. So the audio will be captured on video for YouTube, and you can then say to your kids or grandkids, you can see me on a nationally distributed video about World War II on YouTube. So make sure and follow that instruction if you can. If you renew or become a member of the Roundtable tonight and support the ongoing administrative costs of presenting our lectures, all history books in the bookstore will be 20% off this evening, and the museum will extend to you a complimentary one-year individual membership. Should you wish to make a cash donation to the Roundtable for tonight's lecture, you may do so at the donations box by the table where you registered, where you came in. At your seat is a QR code which you can use to join the Roundtable. Museum staff are available to assist you if you have any kind of problems. Included in your printed program is an evaluation of tonight's lecture. We are always interested in your views on what we can do better to grow and develop the Roundtable. The Roundtable has volunteer positions available as committee members and on the board of directors. We specifically need computer support and promotion. You can make your interest known by seeing any of us after the lecture or included on the evaluation form, and we will be in touch. Please leave the completed form in the cash register as you leave, at the cash register as you leave. By the way, the Roundtable is one of about 25 in the nation and the only one in Texas, and the only one of the few who doesn't charge an admission fee. You will not want to miss our concluding 2025 lecture on October 23rd. John Parshall, adjunct professor at the Naval War College in Rhode Island, frequent lecturer at the World War II Museum, author of the definitive book on the Battle of Midway entitled Shattered Sword, The Untold Story of the Battle of Midway, and co-host of the internationally acclaimed podcast, The Unauthorized History of the Pacific War, now in its 4th year of weekly lectures, will be the speaker. A special guest and good friend of his, named Tony Tully, who is a recognized scholar of the Imperial Japanese Navy and author of 2 books about naval battles in the Pacific, will in all probability be with him here, and you'll be able to talk to him also. Gold sponsor for the Parshall lecture will be Dr. Jerry Ransom, the mayor of the city of Greenville. We're pleased that he has stepped forward in support of our programs. A word about 2026. The next month, the Programs Committee of the Roundtable will have their initial meeting to begin selecting the theme and the lecturers for 2026. We anticipate 5 lectures for the year, including 1 designated for the Audie Days program, which is held in April, I think. Your input will be very helpful in that regard. Again, let us know your wishes on the form, names of speakers, topics of lectures that you would like to see, a theme for next year, if that's of interest to you. And leave it on that form before you leave tonight. And you can feel free to send an email or text about your thoughts. My email address is in the program. And now, would you welcome Skip Steele, who will introduce Margaret Kincannon. Skipper, as we call him, for those of you who are new, the rest of you have heard this 3 or 4 times, is the author of over 20 books on World War II history, biographies of prominent Northeast Texas individuals, and the definitive biography of James Richardson, the admiral in command of the Pacific Fleet, who foretold the possibility of an airstrike at Pearl Harbor due to the inadequacy of the island's defensive capability. Richardson was from Paris, Texas, and died in 1974. Skipper is from Paris, Texas. He's a graduate of East Texas A&M, and his father was on the original Board of Regents at the university. Please welcome our good friend and scholar, Skip Steele.
And that was East Texas State University. I have not accepted A&M yet. Sorry about that. And I know while he's not here, I'm going to say that the emeritus Kenneth Lawrence Clinton got his name Rocky one night at the Delt House when our black belt expert challenged him to a boxing match. Rocky knocked him on the floor after the 2nd or 3rd swing and inherited the name Rocky for the rest of his life. Anyway, we appreciate him sponsoring along with Alliance Bank for sure. Now, I passed out a couple of days ago while I was trying to research the Dallas Morning News. I don't know if that means anything or not, but I'm going to read what I have to say instead of just, winging it like I usually do. But, we've done this for nearly 2 years. We've talked about the health of Hitler, generals, women in the draft, action in Africa, Italy, Central Europe. We talked a little bit about Russia, Japan, and the war in part of the Pacific, Iwo Jima especially. So now we turn to what they call the CBI. Raise your hand if you ever heard of the CBI. All right. That's the China-Burma-India theater. And it's really an unbelievable amount of World War II. It seems like most of the books written about the 700,000 trips called Flying the Hump, which resulted in logistics moving from India and action in China, have had books written about them by their daughters. And we have Mary Walker Clark here tonight, has written one herself about her father. Stand up, Mary. Stand on the chair if you need to. I'm glad to have you. We nearly had Mary Spencer here, whose father, Otha Spencer, flew the hump also and wrote a couple of books. There were over 600 planes lost in attempting 148 to supply the 148,000 American combat sorties from 1941 to 1945. Of over 9,000 B-25 Mitchells that were built, the Flying Tigers began with 7. But most of them eventually served in the Pacific, many in China. Before flying out of the Marianas, the new B-29 took off from China and headed over to the Pacific Rim and targeted locations 2,867 times before they moved out of China. So the supply chain was working. It had to work. I've studied a little bit about China under my research on Admiral Richardson, and he was there in the 1920s, but he dealt with the attack of the USS Panay on the Yangtze River in 1937. And then some of you might realize that probably really started World War II, but we paid off we made them pay off us, and we prolonged the war a couple more years. I've also done a fair amount of reading on Claire Lee Chennault, who was born in Commerce, we think, and was commander in Central China, both as a civilian and a U.S. Army Air Corps leader. And he worked under General Joseph Stilwell. Stilwell, ironically, was replaced by Albert Cody Wiedemeyer in 1945, and he was another person connected to Admiral Richardson. Admiral Richardson in 1938 was shut away in a room to work out a new version of the War Plan Orange. Orange was Japan. And his partner in that crime was General Stanley Dunbar Imbick, who was the father-in-law to General Wiedemeyer. It's always a small world in the military. They all know each other anyway. So tonight we have Margaret Kincannon to lecture us on the American action in China, which was an astonishingly long, dangerous, and efficient period use of our men and equipment. Originally begun as an assistant to and a supplement to Doolittle's attack on Tokyo, the assignment grew and grew as the years went by. Greenville, as you know, had 2 pilots fly with Doolittle over Tokyo. One was Nolan A. Herndon, and the other one was Dean Hallmark. But they never made it to China. Margaret's father did, and I'll let her tell you the rest of his story. Thank you for coming, Margaret.
Oh, this is too high. I'm not quite as tall as Skipper. Well, thank you so much for this opportunity. I want to share with you some information that you probably don't know. When Chennault arrived in June 1937, China was on the brink of war with Japan. A year later, things were desperate. A great part of China lay in Japanese hands. Chennault's empathy for the people of China led him to become a fierce advocate for their cause, and a venture that began as a paid position became his passion. Is that working? Where does this go? Where do I point this? Oh, here? Up? Okay, okay. Go back with me to July 24th, 1945. That was 80 years ago today. Early that morning, 8 B-25 Mitchell bombers flew to Yuchang, deep in enemy territory. Some of the air crews consisted of only Americans, some of Chinese, and some of mixed squadrons, mixed personnel. All carried powerful RDX bombs. Their target was a spinning mill being used as a warehouse. The area was heavily defended by searchlights and by anti-aircraft fire. Wuchan, on the southern bank of the Yangtze River, with Hankou on the north side, are called Wuhan. You may know that as the point of origin for a recent pandemic, but at that time, the threat was much more tangible. The Twin Cities formed an important transportation and distribution hub occupied by the Japanese, and its factories, warehouses, and stockpiles were bombed repeatedly during the war. Four P-51 Mustangs escorted the bombers. Because the Allies now had control of the air over China, the fighters operated as bombers. Each carried a single RDX on one wing and a gas tank on the other. Two of the Mustangs were directed to fall into formation, and each of the two echelons of bombers, and to drop their bombs when they saw the bombs falling from the Mitchells. As the aircraft approached Wuchang, they encountered heavy 75mm ground fire. It was close enough to be heard and to bounce the aircraft. Bombs blasted the target. A report noted crewmen did not have much to say about Hankou Wuchan area. They were all watching the flak. Okay. My father, Staff Sergeant James H. Mills, was also watching the flak, and he remembered this mission for the rest of his life. He confided, "I dreaded night bombing runs and those big spotlights the Japanese had. They'd flash on our plane, lock onto us, and we could see ack-ack all around us. The sky was full of those little black puffs, and they were trying to shoot us down." In his position as tail gunner, he felt a sudden impact to the front of his lower leg. But his kneeling position in the cramped compartment prevented him from seeing the extent of the injury. When the plane pulled up, he decided, well, I've got to feel back there to know how bad it is. I put my hand down, felt around, pulled my hand up. There's no blood. I couldn't understand that. So I put my hand down there again, felt around. There's still no blood. Later, he checked the deck, and there that spent shell was that hit him. It had maintained sufficient velocity to pierce the skin of the aircraft, but it only gouged a place in his boot. He never even reported it, but he kept that shell until the end of his life. And I remember seeing that when I was a child. Now, Consider this. Why were American airmen risking their lives in China? Why were they fighting alongside the Chinese? And why was this so important? Those are the questions I want to answer. It all began with Claire Chennault. To better understand the man, you must know something about his background. Born in East Texas in 1893, Chennault spent his boyhood in northeast Louisiana. His lineage led back to Sam Houston and Robert E. Lee, and hence his middle name. He loved history, particularly reading about great armies fighting decisive battles. He attended LSU and completed ROTC training. After graduating from college, he spent the next few years as a teacher in a series of small towns in the South. Then, in 1917, the U.S. entered World War I. Chennault applied for flight training, but at 26, he was rejected as too old. He graduated from officer school as a first lieutenant in the infantry reserve and then transferred to the aviation division of the Signal Corps. Hostilities ended before he could get his wings. He was rejected 3 times because he did not possess the qualifications to become an aviator, according to his superiors. On the 4th attempt, Chennault was accepted, and he graduated from pursuit training as a pilot and commanded a fighter squadron. It was then that he began developing his innovative air tactics. Chennault was appointed Chief of Pursuit Section at Air Corps Tactical Schools. Too far. During those post-war, I went too far again. During those post-war years, Chennault was an aerobatic flyer of biplanes in the lead of a 3-man team that performed across the country. Chennault published The Role of Defensive Pursuit in 1935. His belief that bombers were vulnerable to attack by fighter planes set him at odds with his superiors. In 1937, Chennault had served 20 years in the military, but was repeatedly passed over for promotion. Citing chronic bronchitis and deafness from years of open cockpit flying, he resigned with the rank of captain and disbanded the aerobatics team. He accepted an invitation from nationalist leader Chiang Kai-shek to survey the ineffectual Republic of China Air Force, and thus began Chennault's second military career for which he became most famous. He found that the invaders were committing atrocities against Chinese civilians, systematically torturing, raping, killing, and plundering. Japanese planes bombed Tokyo, bombed Kunming and the vicinity almost daily, and the Chinese Air Force could do little to deter them. Underpaid contract, Chennault became Chiang Kai-shek's chief air advisor. He returned to the U.S. in 1941 and recruited men from the Army Air Corps, Marines, and Navy that formed the first American volunteer group. It comprised 3 squadrons of fighter planes flying P-40s using Chennault's defensive pursuit tactics. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, in December 1941, the AVG went into action, attacking ground targets and engaging enemy aircraft. Their primary objective was to protect the Burma Road, but the unit also guarded strategic locations in Southeast Asia and Western China. The AVG racked up an impressive series of victories. 2 weeks after their first mission came the earliest news reports praising the fearless flyers, and soon Chinese newspapers, followed by the American press, began calling them Flying Tigers. Their exploits became legendary, and Chennault was their hero as his leader. John H. Yee, AVG interpreter, explained the origin of the nickname. For the first time in their lives, the people of Kunming witnessed something beyond their wildest dreams. As the Japanese killer bombers were shot down before their own eyes, they clapped their hands and jumped for joy. A local news reporter described the AVG as acting like flying tigers in pursuit of a Japanese flock of sheep. Taken from the Chinese newspaper, the term was used to praise the American airmen and was not originally intended for use as the name of any particular unit. The AVG became famous for its distinctive nose art as well as its nickname. When pilot Charlie Bond saw Royal Air Force P-40s with shark teeth in a magazine, he decided, I want my P-40 to look like that. When he went to Chennault to ask permission, the commander ordered him, paint them all that way. The AVG claimed 297 Japanese aircraft destroyed and numbered 26 aces among its pilots. The Burma Road had been lost, but the Japanese could no longer bomb China cities at will. Chennault returned to active duty in the U.S. Army Air Forces in April 1942 with the rank of colonel and was promoted to brigadier general. He feared that converting his AVG into a regulation unit would damage its effectiveness, but top brass had no intention of supporting a private air force that operated outside military channels. At midnight on July 4th, 1942, the AVG ceased to exist. Replaced by the China Air Task Force and inducted into the USAAF, the outfit continued to be called the Flying Tigers. It consisted of the 23rd Fighter Group, commanded by AVG veteran Colonel Robert T. Smith. He was famous for the God is my co-pilot. With 4 squadrons, the assigned 74th, 75th, and 76th squadrons, and the attached 16th Fighter Squadron and 11th Bomb Squadron. Because of Japan's occupation of Burma, its mission was to defend the air supply route over the Himalayas between India and China, called the Hump, and to provide air support to Chinese ground forces. Stationed in India, the CATF operated under Chennault's command as part of the 10th Air Force. Life magazine China correspondent reported that it was tasked to defend half of China, from Chongqing is how how it was pronounced then, to Chengdu, as far north as the Salween River, and as far west as Tibet. We are ringed around by the enemy, by enemy bases on 3 sides of our positions. And the enemy can put in the air against us anywhere from 5 to 10 times our strength. The handful of planes harassed the Japanese along a 5,000-mile front, making such places as Canton and Hong Kong tremendous drains on the Japanese. Despite being small, the CATF inflicted a disproportionate degree of damage, but its 5 squadrons were too small, just not enough to wage war on the scope that Chennault and Chiang Kai-shek envisioned. The CATF was disbanded on March 19, 1943. Because I will be mentioning a lot of strange place names, I want to provide this map that might help you with understanding some of them. Okay, so at that time, I can try to make this work.
Where's the red? In the middle there, the red then?
Oh, red. Okay, yeah. All right. Okay, so all of this is China that extends all the way down here. Okay. Way to the west is Karachi. We'll be talking about that later. The border of Burma extends down here and here. You'll be hearing about this place. This is pronounced Michina, according to pilots that I've talked to. So I know it's a verifiable thing. Okay, the Lido Road extended later on. It was in the process of being built from here down through Burma, and there it met with the Burma Road that extended up here from Burma to Kunming. What else do I want to show you? All right, here's the Hap route that extended from here across to Kunming, and this was the only means that could be used for bringing in troops and supplies. The Salween River, you'll hear about that. It extends here, coming down from China and going into Burma. And the Yangtze River extends here and meanders over this way. The Yellow River is much higher up here. We won't be looking at that. The 14th Air Force replaced the CATF. The 14th was greatly expanded to include the 68th, the 69th, and the Chinese-American Composite Wings. Composite means it was made up of bombers and fighters. And the 312th Fighter Wing. Other units were brought in that had a greater diversity of aircraft. Some of them transferred in from the 10th Air Force, but it was still smaller than any of the other air forces in the rest of the world. The 14th Air Force was formed on March 5th and activated by a special order of President Roosevelt. Chennault, now a major general, was placed in command. It conducted fighter and bomber operations along a wide front, from the bend of the Yellow River and Jinan in the north to Indochina all the way to the south, from Chengdu and the Salween River to the west to the East and South China Seas and the island of Formosa. It also supplied Chinese forces through the essential hump route that carried cargo. The 14th Air Force carried on the Flying Tigers tradition. Its insignia featured a winged Bengal tiger with the Army Air Force star above its back. The effectiveness of the Air Force soon earned it the moniker the Fighting 14th. Significant among these units was the Chinese-American Composite Wing that took Chennault's intention of assisting the Chinese even farther than before. The CACW was Chennault's baby, according to a service publication. To rehabilitate the Chinese Air Force, now decimated and debilitated by years of war, and to provide goodwill and understanding between the Chinese and the Americans for the future, Chennault proposed an operational training unit be established. Using existing Chinese Air Force squadrons, the CACW would train CAF personnel, officers, and enlisted in all phases of combat operations, as well as maintenance administration, according to modern American military standards. The CACW, under code name Lotus, was formally activated on October 1st. It was the only one of its kind in the world. Chennault's plan was for one bomb squadron to be trained with 2 fighter squadrons over a period of 6 weeks, with the Americans acting as mentors to the Chinese. When those squadrons completed training, they would be sent to China as 3 more squadrons began training. This would continue until a bomb squadron of 2 fighter groups and a bomb 2 fighter groups and a bomb group, each with 4 squadrons, were brought to combat readiness. Malir Airdrome near Karachi was chosen as the OTU's location because equipment and supplies were more readily available there than in China. Duplicate commands were established at every level. Colonel Winslow C. Morse was appointed wing commander, and Lieutenant Colonel Chang Y.F. became vice commander. Despite vast differences, both nationalities worked to attain their common goals. The CACW eventually consisted of the 3rd Fighter Group, the 5th Fighter Group, both of those flying P-40s and later P-51s, many of them painted with the iconic shark mouth, and the 1st Bomb Group, equipped with B-25s. While the U.S. officers of the fighter group were largely untested in combat, the bomb group's original commander, Colonel John A. Hilger, had been a pilot on Jimmy Doolittle's famous raid on Tokyo. He was later replaced by Colonel Irving L. Branch. The 1st Bomb Group and the 3rd Fighter Group were formed on July 31st. Per Chennault's schedule, their training was completed on August 5th. The 2nd Bomb Squadron, followed by the 28th and 32nd Squadron fighters, went to China, arriving on October 25th. They moved to an airfield near Guilin. I think that's pronounced Guilin. soon afterward. They spent the fall in operations against Japanese shipping and airfields along China's southern coast. The CACW officially entered combat on November 4th, when 3 2nd Squadron B-25s flew out on a raid with Mitchell's of the 69th Composite Wing. This was a successful sea sweep to hit shipping at Swato Harbor. Meanwhile, the next 3 squadrons began training. The 1st Bomb Squadron and the 7th and 8th Fighter Squadrons completed training and joined the first 3 at Quailin. On February 24th, 1st Bomb Squadron Mitchells joined the Avengers and Sky Dragons in a raid against rail yards and warehouses, and the fighter squadrons flew on March 4th as bomber unit, as bomber escort. As they were entering combat, the Japanese were making plans for aggression. They had been transporting troops and supplies south from Manchuria and Peking, now called Beijing, via railroad to the Yellow River Bridge for a drive south to capture the entire Peking-Hankou Railroad. The 1st Bomb Squadron generally operated with the 2nd Squadron during this time until September, when it moved to Hancheng. The Yellow River Bridge soon became its primary target. The 7th and 8th Squadron fighters operated out of Liangshan, farther southeast. Mission A was the code name for the CACW air campaign intended to disrupt the offensive. The plan was to allow the Japanese to assemble their forces and then attack 4 days before intelligence expected them to advance. The CACW was tasked to destroy parts of the railway infrastructure and bridges, assist the Chinese army, intercept air attacks, and impede enemy ground troops. But the advance started sooner than they anticipated. They crossed the bridge over the Yellow River on April 19. The 3rd Fighter Group and the 2nd Bomb Squadron spent May to June attacking enemy ground forces and other targets in the vicinity. Despite their opposition, the Japanese accomplished all their goals. Nevertheless, CACW units inflicted significant damage, and the 3rd Fighter Group and the 2nd Bomb Squadron received Distinguished Unit citations. The Japanese drive became a major offensive called Operation Ichigo, forming a gigantic pincer movement designed to split free China. It became Japan's largest operation to date. Japanese forces drove from occupied areas in the north and south, capturing or destroying everything in their path. It had 3 main objectives: improve routes of supply and communication by controlling the railroad between Peking and Hong Kong, provide a link between Japanese forces in China and French Indochina, and eliminate the Allied airfields in southern China being used for raids into South and Central China. The enemy offensive was relentless, and the overwhelming force of the invaders crushed the understrength, demoralized Chinese defenders. In the OTU's 3rd phase, the 5th Fighter Squadron, a 5th Fighter Group, was activated, and the first 2 of its squadrons began training. The 4th Bomb Squadron and the 26th and 29th Fighter Squadrons completed training and began the move to Guilin in mid-March. While the 3rd Fighter Group and the 2nd Bomb Squadrons, were operating with Mission A in the north, the 5th Fighter Group and the 1st and 4th Bomb Squadrons fought the enemy farther to the south. Assigned to Mission B, also called the East China Task Force, they carried out operations along the East China coast. Staging out of bases in the path of the drive, the B-25s made sweeps to interdict shipping as well as attacks on railroad and storage facilities. The 5th Fighter Group was used to strafe advancing Japanese troops, intercept air attacks, and escort bombers. Despite persistent pounding, the Japanese continued their drive south, taking the American bases. During this time, all units of the CACW were moving from one airfield to another as the situation rapidly changed. The 5th Fighter Group established its base at Zhejiang. I know that's not how it looks, but that's how it's pronounced now. And a detachment from the 4th Bomb Squadron followed soon afterward. The 5th Fighter Group's 17th and 27th Fighter Squadrons with the 3rd Bomb Squadron formed the 4th and final training group in early March and completed training in mid-May. The 17th Fighter Squadron arrived in China in late May and the 27th in July. They were sent to Zhejiang and remained there for the duration of the war. The 3rd Bomb Squadron did not immediately move to China, but spent the summer in the Burma campaign, temporarily attached to the 10th Air Force. The 3rd Squadron's first combat mission was off on June 25th, when 2 B-25 bombers strafed railroad bridges and rails below Chennault, used by the Japanese as a base of operations. And this was where my father, then Corporal James H. Mills, enters the picture. Attached as a B-25 crew chief, he was soon flying missions. They volunteered me, he told me. In July and August, the 3rd Squadron supported Stilwell's ground troops advancing south from northern Burma, as well as others moving west from China's Yunnan province. Probably the most significant contribution of the 3rd Squadron was supporting the siege at Chennault. Squadron Mitchells bombed the city just 45 minutes before Chinese troops seized it. For their support, the 3rd Squadron received a unit citation. The capture of Chennault completed the reconquest of 10,000 square miles of Burma, and the prospect of joining the Lido Road and the Burma Road was in sight. The Japanese had used Chennault to attack Allied aircraft flying over the hump. An immediate benefit was that aircraft were able to fly much farther south and therefore at a lower altitude. Within a few months, the amount of tonnage had doubled, and the supply of fuel and ammunition increased markedly. Orders came through for the 3rd Squadron's move. It was the last of the CACW squadrons to move to China. The first planes arrived at Guilin on August 30. Operation Ichigo was rampaging through China, and enemy forces had begun their advance on Guilin. Chinese troops, who had recently retreated following the Battle of Changsha, were incapable of offering battle, but engaged in a series of delaying tactics. Assigned to the 68th Composite Wing and operating with the 4th Bomb Squadron and others, the 3rd Squadron took part in 4 missions out of Guilin. Evacuation began by train, air transport, and truck convoy on September 12th. You notice didn't mean to do that. You notice the train cars are just absolutely loaded with people. I read later some reports, some newspaper articles that said that the Japanese used snipers along the way and killed many of them. And the people who were riding on the train often had to stop and hide in the woods until the threat was past. Headed northwest to Beishi, near Chongqing, the 3rd and 4th Squadrons, B-25s, took off as demolition of anything that could be used by the enemy began. Other airfields fell over the next few months. By inflicting such massive degrees of damage, the Japanese were hoping to force Chiang Kai-shek to sue for peace. With operations restricted out of Beishi by shortages of gas and supplies, including bombs, a task force made up of detachments from the 3rd and 4th Squadrons was formed. Operating out of Zhejiang with the 5th Fighter Group, it completed 63 missions, many of them moonless night missions against truck convoys passing through the Xiang River Valley, as well as attacks on supply areas at Wuhan and other locations. The 4th Bomb Squadron detachment continued to conduct operations out of Zhejiang with the fighter group until the end of the war. But the 3rd Squadron detachment returned to its squadron, then relocating to Liangshan. In early 1945, Imperial headquarters in Tokyo revised its China policy in response to Allied victories in the Pacific. With island strongholds in danger of falling to the Allies, Japan feared these strategic locations would become staging bases for launching an amphibious attack along the China coast. The primary focus shifted to prevention or defense against the invasion. Now a renewed offensive began with an attack westward on a broad front between the Yellow and Yangtze rivers. The primary objective was to overrun new Allied bases in the same way they had Guilin and other bases the previous year, interdicting their use for providing air support to the invasion. Lohoko, home of the 3rd Fighter Group, was at that time the most easterly of the 14th Air Force bases. Its airstrip had functioned as a safe haven for emergency landings before its use to launch raids against Japanese supply lines. The Japanese took advantage of winter conditions. In response, CACW planes defended Lohoko beginning in early February, but the town and airstrip fell in late March. Where am I? Okay, I went too far. Now, Zhejiang became the most easterly 14th Air Force Base. It held great strategic value because it controlled the Xiang River Valley. The success of raids launched from Zhejiang made it the next target. The Japanese initiated an attack on April 10th. Chinese defenders had a numerical advantage that had never proved sufficient to offset the superior equipment and training of the enemy. But the defense of Zhejiang demonstrated their renewed spirit and determination. 3rd and 4th Bomb Squadron and 5th Fighter Group planes successfully defended the threatened base. By mid-May, it was obvious that the defense of Zhejiang had held. The Battle of Zhejiang was the turning point of the war in China. Following their defeat, the Japanese decided to relinquish their Greater East Asia corridor and withdraw from South China to positions north of the Yellow River. It was the first time since 1937 that any of Japan's seriously fought objectives had been denied. The Japanese began moving back up the Xiang River Valley, headed toward Shanghai. From there, their forces could be used to defend against Allied landings or be shipped back to the home islands to prepare for a final defensive. Colonel John A. Dunning, commanding the 5th Fighter Group, now called Dunning's Demons, was credited with much of the success. Dunning's determination to stay until the last possible moment saved the base, and the Japanese were turned. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Silver Star, and the 5th Fighter Group received a unit citation. Went too far. When General Chennault, it keeps skipping. Okay. When General Chennault was later interviewed, he stated the enemy threw troops away when they were desperately needed elsewhere. The Japanese divisions employed in the East China campaign, if they were thrown into the Philippines, would have altered the military picture considerably. Beloved by the men who served under him and esteemed as a brilliant tactician in both the U.S. and China, Chennault often ran afoul of military leaders who lacked confidence in his innovative ideas and who favored their own agendas. As the war in China was winding down, Chennault was forced out once again. Major General Wiedemeyer received orders from Washington to reorganize the air forces for the purpose of liberating a port on the China coast. The plan called for moving the 10th Air Force under Major General Stratemeyer from now liberated Burma to China to replace the 14th Air Force. Stratemeyer would command the China Theater Air Forces. Under him, Chennault would command the Strategical Air Force and Major General Davidson the Tactical Air Force. The 10th Air Force would be based south and west of Zhejiang for direct support with Chinese ground forces, while the 14th Air Force would be banished north of the Yangtze. After taking the best bomber and fighter units from the 14th, the 10th Air Force would advance eastward with the Chinese armies. Chennault had little intention of being put out to pasture and entered a vigorous protest. Six days later, Stratemeyer officially assumed command. He promptly approved Chennault's request for retirement, handed in on the same date. It was a month later, August 11, 1945. This mission, under code name Butcher, would include all 4 CACW bomb squadrons and several of the fighter units. The Yellow River Bridge was once again the target. This bridge had been bombed repeatedly, but the Japanese always quickly repaired it and resumed rail traffic. This was to be the final assault, to destroy it once and for all. Colonel John S. Chennault, eldest son of General Chennault, would oversee the strike. The Japanese had heavily reinforced the bridge and installed anti-aircraft and large-caliber machine guns in caves and on both banks. So any bombing mission would be a suicide mission. My dad remembered this very well. He said that there was little hope that they would all come back alive. I figured if we didn't make it, that was my time to go. B-24s and B-29s would first knock out the anti-aircraft guns. Next, the fighters would create a smoke screen in front of the machine gun emplacements. Then the B-25s, in groups of 4, would fly south along the bridge to release their bombs. The first elements were off at 0600 and had been in the air for about 20 minutes. The first squadron's Mitchells had just fired up their engines, and the third squadron was on the runway, and their planes were ready to roll. My dad was in his usual position as tail gunner. Before the bombers were airborne, the tower instructed the pilot in my dad's words, "Don't take off. The mission's been canceled." He taxied back in, and someone ran out shouting, "The Japs have surrendered." Informational leaflets were dropped the next day. Japan had not officially surrendered, but discussions had begun, and a ceasefire was issued that stopped Butcher in its tracks. For them, the war was over. Dad said that they didn't know the U.S. had dropped atomic bombs or that there were any negotiations going on to end the war. Most people know only about the surrender aboard USS Missouri, but several regional surrenders preceded it. On August 21st, Japanese dignitaries arrived at Zhejiang for a preliminary conference. Major General Takao Imai, with 2 staff officers and an interpreter, was received by General Xiao Yishun. The next day, the Japanese emissary received instructions for the formal surrender of military forces in China, set to take place in Nanjing, which was a site of a horrible massacre earlier in the war. He accepted the terms of surrender and signed the documents, officially ending hostilities between Japan and China. This location was not chosen at random. It was a deliberate, in-your-face reminder of the humiliating defeat the Japanese had suffered there at that base just months before. In his memoirs, Chennault wrote this quote, attributed to Lieutenant General Takahashi, commander of Japanese forces in central China. Considering all the difficulties my armies encountered in China, including guerrillas, ground armies, lack of supplies, difficult terrain, and non-cooperation of the Chinese, I judged the operations of the 14th Air Force to have constituted between 60% and 75% of our effective opposition in China. Without the Air Force, we could have gone anywhere we wanted. Chennault wrote that this was his best testimonial. Historians have postulated these what-if scenarios. If China had surrendered in 1938, Japan would have controlled all of China, gaining access to its vast natural resources and manpower. Diverted from occupying China, Japan would have consolidated control over all of mainland Asia, sent more troops into the Pacific War, and even turned to attack the USSR, Southeast Asia, or British India. It would have been a huge propaganda boost. The European and Asian wars might never have come together as they did after Pearl Harbor. It would have prolonged the war, causing even greater loss of lives. Japan and the world had expected Chiang Kai-shek to surrender, but he refused. China stayed in the war and continued to fight, and I am convinced that a great part of his motivation was because of the aid rendered by Chennault and his airmen. It changed the fate of Asia and likely the world. Chennault wrote as the final sentence of his memoirs, "It is my fondest hope that the sign of the flying tigers will remain aloft just as long as it is needed, and that it will always be remembered on both shores of the Pacific as the symbol of two great peoples working toward a common goal in war and peace." Yet much of the story of Chennault and his flying tigers has been lost in the United States today. In China, it was actively suppressed. Following Chiang Kai-shek's fall from power and the takeover by Mao Zedong and his communists in 1949. Only from the 1980s did Chinese authorities begin allowing a broader perspective. Today, China has explicitly embraced huge portions of its war history that remained taboo during the Cold War. In 1923, Xi Jinping wrote a letter to two veterans of the China Air War and the chairman of the Sino-American Aviation Heritage Foundation. He emphasized the friendship and cooperation between our two countries in times of war and the necessity of maintaining peace by working together today. In growing U.S.-China relations, the hope lies in the people. The foundation lies among the people, and the future lies with the youth. A sound and steady development of the relationship in the new era requires the input and support of a new generation of flying tigers. I hope that the spirit of flying tigers will be carried on from generation to generation among Chinese and American peoples. Today, Chinese school children are being taught about the flying tigers and the men who came from far away to help them in their fight against the foreign invaders. Is Chennault's hope being fulfilled? Or is this just some kind of political ploy? Only time will tell. That's all I have for you this evening.
You stay right there.
Oh,
Sorry?
I'm good for orders.
There's so much we don't know. It's amazing, you know. Yeah, it's so hard to understand why we don't like each other. Any questions? Barry?
Very.
Great job.
Barry, by the way, is a nephew of great nephew, and then he sure looks like him, doesn't he?
I wish I had his willpower. Great job, by the way. General Vinegar Joe Stilwell had a disdain for General Chennault and the Flying Tigers, even for petty reasons that Chennault let the pilots wear whatever they want, no tie. I don't want them to dress for me. I want them to fight for me. That really angered him. In your research, have you seen anything that there was a purposeful action by General Stilwell to withhold or delay or redirect supplies that really needed to go to the Tigers, but after that spiked, he purposely would undersupply the Flying Tigers?
Going up just upon my research, what I read, Stilwell, when General Chennault requested more supplies to be sent to China to be used against the Japanese there, Stilwell insisted that he still needed them in Burma. So he refused to increase the amount of tonnage going to across the hunt for Chinese troops. That's what I know. I'm fairly convinced that's true.
What about your full of love story under this? Oh, he met a second wife, or they divorced the first?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, he had spent so many years in China that I'm quite certain that his first wife, Nell, just got tired of waiting for him. And so they were divorced. And then he later met Anna, I can't remember her name. Yes. And so they had a professional relationship at first, but then that changed and they were married and they had 2 daughters.
And do you know the 2 daughters, Barry, or?
No, but I know that Nell Thompson was not that part of the family. He was not really thrilled with that. Sister, she was got tired of waiting. That there was no better like such. He'd go over.
When did his son Jack come into the picture?
Jack was the eldest son, and I know that he had I don't remember if it was a fighter group, or if it was a squadron, but he was in Alaska. And I have seen photographs of some of his planes that had a version of the shark mouth on all of the fighters.
Yes.
Sorry. No, I was just gonna kind of tell a funny story about being in Kunming, and there is a restaurant there that's called the Flying Tigers, and it is the home of General Chennault and their children. They have pictures of the weddings and all of that in there. It was also, and it's decorated with, quote, World War II paraphernalia, and I'm not sure it all was. We did recognize that the waiters were wearing Russian military garb as opposed to any kind of World War II garb. And they spoke absolutely no English. And we just wanted we were trying to explain to them that, like my dad flew the hump, he really wasn't a flying tiger. And they just didn't get it. And they would just go, oh, yeah. And I'm going, no. He just flew over, And, but they also, we wanted to buy a bottle of wine, and they were just shocked because wine's very expensive there. And they made us pay for it in advance before they would let us have the wine when we finally got it ordered. But it's still a really interesting place, and they're still filled with great admiration for Chennault there.
Yeah, he was a hero. I have found that there's very little understanding of exactly what the Flying Tigers were, about exactly what the Americans who came there, about the different units that comprised the military at that time. They do assume that everybody must have been a pilot.
And everybody was
They moved around so much on one base to another.
Yes.
How did the parents ever know where they're at? Did they have a simple point where they wrote their letters?
Well, the way I first started doing research was I found a very small photograph about this big, a very small photograph of a Buddha or something like that. And on the back of it was my dad's rank and name, 3rd Bomb Squadron, CSEW, and then it did have an APO number, 627, I think it was, if I remember. I do remember that. I remember strange things. So, and so he had sent that home to my mom because they had gotten married just not very long after he shipped overseas. And so they provided that APO number so that the mail service would be able to forward it to the correct location.
My father used to write home and say, "Did you read that article about so-and-so in Collier's magazine?" And then make the hint that that's about where we are. Yeah. Sneak it in there some way. Any other? Yes.
What exactly had drawn together? You were talking about how both the American and Chinese soldiers had, worked closely together, but what exactly drew them together? I know you showed pictures of them, getting married. I know you saw a picture of them celebrating Christmas together. Your father's rank card had the symbol of the Buddha on it. What had, what drew the symbolism together specifically? Was it Pearl Harbor? Was it another event?
In this case of the Chinese-American Composite Wing, it was the deliberate decision to have the two national groups train together in order to increase the abilities of the Chinese to be able to participate in defense of their own country. And the Chinese-American Composite Wing was the only unit of its type in the entire war. So it was an experiment. I titled it Chennault's Grand Experiment, is because he kept refining his plan on how to help the Chinese until he decided the only way they're going to do that is to be able to train the Chinese in modern methods. One thing I read was that at the time that Chennault arrived in China, the Chinese were so poorly, their planning, their leadership, their training was so poor that they awarded wings based upon family or some kind of political benefits, relationships, rather than on ability to fly. So the pilots perhaps didn't even have an adequate understanding of how to get the planes in the air and and fly them in combat. So that's why these two organizations were working together. I've talked with some other pilots. There are a couple of them that have, died during COVID, that I was discussing with Dave Hayward, who was in another one of the 14th Air Force units. And he said that the only association they had with the Chinese was they were their houseboys. They did their laundry. They were friendly people, and they would say hi and ding hao on the street and things like that. But they didn't really have the close relationship that the people in the Chinese-American Composite Wing had. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
I brought that up because in our last lecture, there was a lot of talks about how at first there was German and American relationships were kind of like prohibited, and then, that was useless because they shared so much culture.
Mm-hmm.
So because they shared that culture, they worked so closely together, and as well as, why there was a, Air Force base up until, this year in Germany. So that answered my question.
Okay.
I was trying to draw that back.
Draw it in. Thank you.
It's partially a statement and partially a question. I've always wondered if the last name Douglas has anything concerning what y'all are saying, because that's the lady's last name that lived in the house where that statue is. And I'm not statue, the memorial. And I lived in that area as well, and also went to church across the street from that house. And she would be in the little one-car garage behind the house. She converted that into an area of CB, lots of equipment in there. And sometimes at night, you'd see a light still on in there throughout the night. And she would sometimes open one of the doors, and I could see her. I can remember her right now as how she looked. But I didn't know anything other than her last name was Douglas. Do you know her first name?
Was she a radio operator, wasn't she?
Ham radio, yes. And she was just lots of equipment.
Leanne Mill.
Her name is Helen. I'll give you Alice Helen.
Oh, thank you. And she was a mess. She was so funny. She and her mother lived with her until she passed away. And Helen had I've never seen so much equipment in my life. She and my dad had a ham radio. And she and he would, get together and talk about all this stuff. And Helen would walk down the sidewalk, down Monroe Street, just like, she always looked as if she were on a mission. And she just got to the point that she couldn't live alone anymore. So they moved her out to the nursing home in Commerce. I used to go see her quite a lot. And she was over 100 when she died.
Oh, wow.
And you don't know of any connection to her? And not that I know of. I really don't. Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, now, where did you live? Where did you live?
Oh, I live in
Okay. I know exactly where you were. Yeah.
Any more? I got one or two. How accurate were our bombing missions? When you read your book, you read the reports. Did they really hit the target, or?
Well, often they did, but they had a way of rating the success of the mission. And, many of the times that I in my research, I would find that many times that they miss completely. All the bombs would end up in a rice paddy or in the river. But then other times they're very accurate and just right on all the way.
Did they drop leaflets in advance when they had a specific big target?
Yes, they did. The leaflets had a number of purposes, and sometimes they had to do with, some of them were written in Japanese and, threatening the Japanese and trying to persuade them to surrender. And then sometimes they were in Chinese, in the local language, or Burmese, or wherever they were. And those were giving information about potential attacks in that area and telling them to leave the countryside. So I can't remember what the statistics were. I recently read how many millions of people had to evacuate from their homes to some other part of China just to continue to flee from the advancing Japanese.
Yeah, I thought it was real interesting. She describes, or the reports describe, how the Japanese couldn't figure out how to cut their lights off when they were driving in a caravan. So our guys
At night.
take off for the lights.
Mm-hmm.
One more question I have. Anybody else? Why did we move the B-29s completely to Mariana? It was just too dangerous. We couldn't create a good enough field in China.
Well, the Marianas were much closer, obviously, to Japan. And after the successes of the operations in the Pacific, then the Allies were able to move their bases closer and closer to Japan. So this was during the time that the B-29s were making bombing missions. Like hundreds of them would proceed to Japan and bomb their major cities. So it was just a matter of logistics as much as anything.
Did we bomb any Japan towns from China?
I haven't found any information. Yes, from
the lower part of Japan, I guess.
They originally were based in India.
Wow.
And so they would have staging fields that they would fly to and then, refuel and then fly on across the ocean to Japan.
Okay. There was a really fascinating era. Thank you very much. It was great.
I enjoyed it.
This video has been brought to you by Juice. Juice is your community-owned provider for electric, internet, cable TV, and true local programming.